glad that you're here. If you're with us online, I'm so glad that you're here. If you're with us in the room, I'm excited that you're here as well. And if you're new here or new to church in general, we're excited that you're taking a moment to check things out. And I think as you do, one of the things that you'll find is that we are a church of people who are trying to choose the humble path. And so, along with that, let me give that a go. And let me tell you an experience that I had during this COVID quarantine season that revealed something about me. I don't know about any of you, but I discovered that I had a shorter fuse than normal. I got a little angrier, a little more quickly than I thought that I would. So put into perspective, here's one way that I experienced this. So my wife and I, we've been married 12 years. It was our wedding anniversary. And in the middle of the night, we head up to Tucson Medical Center because she's in full labor on our wedding anniversary. Because nothing says challenge like in the middle of a pandemic having a baby on your wedding anniversary. You've never really lived until you've done that. That's what they say anyway. So we're in the hospital. We're at TMC, Tucson Medical Center, and my wife's mom gets there, and then my mom gets there a little bit later, and we're all there. And this is the first time that they are kind of beginning to roll out these COVID measures, these brand new ones. They're being activated all over the place. And so our families are there, and the nurse informs us that our moms are going to have to go. And not just leave in the room, and not just leave in the wing, and not even just leave in the lobby, but leaving the hospital to go wait in their cars, I guess? I don't know. And so it's like, man, I felt like they could have asked a little more nicely. That was just my perspective. But this began a day-long process of me kind of butting heads with our nurse. And I know that's not popular right now. But this is just how it went down. She was very opinionated, and we had some different views on a lot of different things. That's just the way it went down. And so I didn't come to the hospital. I came to the hospital to have a baby. But I didn't come to have a low-level argument, but that's kind of how I felt. I was going about things all day long. I got defensive. After a little while, I got defensive the moment she entered the room. And so I knew that it was like leaking out into my behavior and activities. And so we were her only patient that day. And so we got a lot of her attention. And I didn't think that I was being rude to her, at least not out loud was I being rude to her. But my wife later told me, it's like, you're being nicer to her. So I was like, apparently I was being a jerk earlier. That's what that means. My responses were short. I was disinterested. I knew. I can say whatever I think. I can rationalize it. I can justify it. But I knew that I was not being as kind to her as possible. I was not acting normal, and I knew it, and it was bothering me that I wasn't acting normal. And then my wife, Eileen, she would ask me for something. She's like, hey, can you go get the nurse? And I'd be like, no, is this something I can do myself? It's like, we need to weigh him. I was like, he feels about 8 pounds to me, Can we just let that go? And what's so frustrating is this whole day is a momentous day, celebrating the birth of my 4th kid. It's a lot of kids. My 2nd son, and he's 3 months old now. It's this momentous day. It was exciting, and yet I can vividly remember being so frustrated. And then I don't know if you're anything like me, but then I feel frustrated that I feel frustrated. So then I get home and, cut to the chase. It didn't magically improve the short fuse of mine over this last few months, because now I have 4 kids. I had a short fuse dealing with my kids, right? I'd come home and they were excited to see me, but there's only so many times I can take a headbutt to the groin over and over again. And I'd get frustrated, I'm leveling with you. I'd get frustrated the moment that I got home, and I just kind of want to check out and escape for a little bit. And at one point, my wife informed me that saying to my kids, put your head on the pillow, I don't want to see you until tomorrow, is not the best way to say goodnight. To be fair, I know, I see the reactions. To be fair, I did say I love you first. I love you. Put your head in the pillow. I don't want to see you till tomorrow. And I would see them. Inevitably, they'd sneak around the corners like I couldn't see them. There's only so many times I can put the same kid to bed. That's my story. How have you vented? How have you vented? How have you wanted to vent this season in ways that you've never expected? In what ways has what's on the inside begun to come out with people? And maybe you'd never describe yourself as an angry person, but there are some moments and some thoughts where you sit back and you wonder, what in the world is that? Maybe you're angry at what you're seeing on social media or just media in general. Maybe you're angry about all the different perspectives on the COVID situation or the current racial tensions that are going on, and you look at things and you think to yourself, no matter what your perspective is, how can some people be so wrong? How can some people miss it so badly? It doesn't matter what side you're on things. Each side takes issue with the other. And then maybe you're in a position where you're thinking like, I feel like I should be doing something more than I am, but I don't quite know what that is. I'm a little confused. And just as humans, we don't like being confused. Where I feel confused, I feel out of control and I feel frustrated, which coincidentally makes me more angry. I don't know where to go with it. Maybe you're angry this season. Your investments took a hit. Maybe retirement is years further than you thought. Maybe the quarantine took something from you. Maybe a loved one or a loved one of a loved one, but you're sitting there picking up the pieces with them. Maybe it took a job. Maybe it took a career move and shift that you've always wanted. Maybe it took your graduation. Maybe it took the last semester of your senior year, those things you can't get back. Maybe it took a birthday that you're like, I guess I'll celebrate next year. Maybe it took a vacation, and that's something maybe you could reschedule, but will it ever happen? I don't know. There's a lot of reasons that you could throw up there to be frustrated. There's frustration and anger all over all of this. And I think what makes me even more frustrated when I think about it and talk about it and process it all is like, I don't know what to be angry with or who to be angry with. It's like, I don't know if any of you feel like, I'm going to get mad and I'm just going to like punch the air. It's like, who am I supposed to be frustrated? I'll just let it out on anyone and consequently everyone. And there is just something about the people in our lives who we love the most tend to catch the most of it. And it's easy. I think when I think of myself, it is so easy for me to write off and dismiss the anger that I see in myself. It's easy to downplay it or justify it. And maybe you're thinking, okay, and when I say downplay, I just mean those moments where you're like, I'm not angry. I'm going to use a nicer synonym for anger. I'm annoyed. I'm irritated. A little frustrated. I'm not angry. The moment you tell anyone like, I am filled with rage, something has to happen. But if you use all these other kind of euphemisms, these niceties for being angry, you can just kind of keep those and just kind of let those bury down deep. It's easy to downplay it and never actually be honest with what's going on. And if you're a particularly religious person, you've probably become very adept at making things sound better than they actually are. Or you're thinking, okay, downplaying, it's like, I'm not angry. I just never want to see them. I would just prefer to avoid them forever. Okay. Cold shouldering and avoidance is a form of passive aggressiveness. Aggressiveness is anger. It's there. It's there. You can downplay it, but it's there. Or maybe you justify it. And I've been here. I have a right to be angry because I am correct, and those people are idiots. But it's justified, right? It's rationalized. Or my anger is godly. It's righteous anger. I am angry about the things that God would be angry about. When it comes to the topic of anger, how do we cope with this? How do we deal with this? How do we process this? How do we heal from this? And so this is the heart of our series, Inside Out, where we talk about the things that are down deep, those emotions, and how they come out in our actions, they come out in our behavior, but how to process and respond to these. And today, I want to talk about anger and how to respond to it. In the text we're going to be at, we're going to go to the book of James, actually, this weekend. And what I'm excited about is James is written by the half-brother of Jesus. So I think that's just a neat perspective in that, man, what would it take you? What would it require for you to believe that your brother is a son of God? And that's what James comes to the conclusion of. And he has some really insightful thoughts on how to respond to the anger in us. He says this in James 1:19. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And so when you look at this, it's kind of like, it's just all meant to be progressive. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. It all flows from one to another. But as I look at it, I think that the general theme is just slow everything down. Slow everything down. It's not what my anger wants to do, but that's the principle at play here. Slow everything down. Slow down the reaction time. And so the first response, I think that when you and I recognize and see whatever that anger, whatever we call it, is in there in our hearts, our first response is to slow down and seek understanding. It's to slow down to seek understanding. When you slow down, you give yourself time to seek understanding about yourself and about others in your life. That response time lengthens, and you're less likely to act so frustrated. So with others, this is something I just think I think a lot of times our anger comes from that impatience and not taking the time to learn someone else's perspective. I think if you're quick to listen, that implies you're probably going to ask more questions than you are to offer answers. And so my whole thought is I think we slow down and we seek understanding. I think that allows us to learn another's perspective. If you're the first person to share an opinion, I won't speak for you, tell you how you are in interactions. For me, as I've gotten older, I've noticed this more about myself. When I was younger, I threw out my opinion first, and I listened only after that in order to form a rebuttal. It's not a good conversation tactic. The older I've gotten, the more I just do that less. I've talked way less than I used to. And that's probably for the best. See, when you slow down and seek understanding and ask those questions and listen, because that's different. You can be quiet and totally not listen. But when you listen, what you end up hearing are other people's opinions. And you're really listening, and you learn a little bit more about them and what they're thinking and ultimately what they're feeling. And that changes your heart in response to them, I think. When you're listening just to form your next argument or opinion, people can tell. And you've probably could tell that in someone else. And it hasn't felt good to be on that side of things. I think the other thing when it comes to like understanding others is I think slowing down and seeking understanding I think it really helps us understand motives. So many times I listen, I assign someone motives. In other words, I tell them what they're really after. And then I respond and react to my assumed motives, which are wrong. And I never give anyone flattering motives, you know? Be like, oh, they're no, not unless I listen, I actually hear them. And I could actually hear them out in response. So I think when we just slow down and seek understanding, we're going to be slow to get angry. We're going to be quick to listen. We're not going to assign motives to people. And I think back to my interaction at Tucson Medical Center with that particular nurse. She had a lot of opinions. She is an expert. She had a lot of insight. And she had some opinions on things about like how education should work in the season. And I was like, well, I used to be a teacher, so I feel like I got a dog in this fight, right? But the thing is, I just kind of, over time, when she was sharing with me, I just kind of thought, she just wants to be the smartest person in the room. And this was me, I was off. I remember thinking that thought, and it changed the way I responded to her for the next few hours. Not in a good way. If I'd have thought about it a little bit more and really took some time to listen, I probably would have realized that there is some fear. She's thinking, I got to be in the hospital for the foreseeable future, and I don't know what this is supposed to look like. And that, if I would have thought through that there might be fear there, I would have been so much more gentle with her. It would have changed my response and reaction to her. So I just say slow down to seek understanding for the sake of others and for the sake of yourself. As I think when you respond, when any of us respond so quickly with anger, without taking time to respond, it's easy to miss signs of anger in ourselves. If you guys are ever heard or familiar with the story of Pompeii, has ever heard of Mount Vesuvius that blew up and it kind of eradicated all those people in Pompeii? Well, if you've never heard, that happened. If you've ever heard of Pompeii, this volcano goes off and it just eradicates the whole population. It was an ancient city, and you can go back and people are like kind of frozen in place that day. There's a wreckage of a city. They've excavated it and all this kind of stuff. However, there were a lot of signs that thing was going to blow days before. I mean, like tons of earthquakes, but they didn't think about the volcano. In fact, the water started to recede into the ground, but they're like, that's interesting. The water turned acidic from all the volcanic activity and actually like killed all the fish in the water. And they were like, this is a sign from the gods. And then when the volcano started to erupt and there was smoke billowing from the ground, they're like, that's interesting. Let's run and see what it is. I mean, there were signs going on below the surface, but nobody understood. And I think it's the same with us and our anger. And so if we'll be quick to listen and slow to speak, we will ultimately understand what's happening in our own hearts. If you ever heard of the anger iceberg before, I'll show you some of this stuff. Anger is what eventually erupts, but there's all these different emotions. There's fear. There's being scared, hurt, humiliated, frustrated, rejected. And a lot of times people feel all of these things. And we just don't want to, like some of those, I'll just speak for myself here, but when I feel rejected or humiliated, I feel shame. I don't want to acknowledge that. I'll get angry about it, but I won't acknowledge it. When you are quick to listen and slow to speak, you are more aware of what's going on in your own heart. And I think that's a game changer. A few weeks ago, Pastor Randy was talking and he says, what ultimately anger, whatever it may be, whatever emotion, whatever comes out of your mouth is an overflow of the heart. And he was sharing that. That's really what Jesus says in Luke 6:45. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when you say, I don't know where that came from, reality is it came from someplace in our hearts. Now, the thing about that is, I also think this is true, that what comes out of our mouths ultimately we hear that, it goes in our head and it fuels what's in our hearts too. It's almost kind of like a cycle. So if I'm angry and I vent it a lot, then I hear it and then I get more angry. And it's the cycle. So I think if we're quick to listen and slow to speak, then ultimately we're just going to control what comes out of our mouth a little bit. And it gives the Holy Spirit just that much more time to shape our attitudes and thoughts, fill things with love that may not be there. It brings conviction and correction too. So anyway, so this whole idea of just slowing down to seek understanding, it makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, it makes a lot of sense just from a life perspective. I don't even think you have to be a follower of Jesus yet to say, I think there's real logic to this. And that may be true, but I feel like when I've thought through that verse before, I've almost kind of used it as a checklist. For if I can do all these things and then I'm still angry, right? If I'm like quick to listen, check that off. Is my perspective biblical and godly? Yep, that means I'm right. Did I get angry? Not out loud. That's good. I use it as a checklist of things that, and if I'm still angry, then it's like, I get to be angry. That is always like, I've always thought of it that way. And in this time, looking at the text in a different way, I'm just hit by something that I haven't been hit by before. Here's what James says. He says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And then he goes on and says this next thing, which blows my mind. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Oh, human anger? Well, I'm human, so that makes my anger human. Right? Human anger doesn't produce the righteousness that God desires. So I was like, what does he mean by righteousness? It's like, okay, there is the righteousness that the Father gives us because of Jesus in our place. Is that what he's talking about? James totally talks about that, but later on. I think what he's saying here, if we could just kind of re-summarize it like this, is that human anger doesn't produce behavior that is pleasing to God. Oh. So my anger whatever I'm feeling, my anger, will never produce what pleases God? Yes. And if that's the case, why would I allow it to stick around? Why would I give myself an excuse to stick it around? Why would I allow it to stay? And that's why I think the Apostle Paul, when he's writing to this another letter to a church in Ephesus thousands of years ago, he says this. He's pretty blunt about it. He says in Ephesians 4:31, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger. Oh, you're angry? Get rid of it. Oh, thanks, Paul. You're angry? Get rid of it. We're human and we're sinful. We miss the mark. We're going to get angry and we have no business getting angry. But what Paul's saying is don't let it stick around. Don't let it change the way you act. Don't let it change you. Don't let it transform your heart. And there's rage and anger, and I appreciate that he puts bitterness on the list. It's like, oh, well, if I don't vent at anybody, I just low-level feud. No, I took that off the list too. Right? Paul addresses that. It's below the surface. So I think our first response to anger is to slow down and seek understanding. But when I look at this, I think our second response to anger is to surrender your right to stay angry. If seeking understanding is what our hands and our head do, then surrendering our right to stay angry is at the heart level. That's where we've got to hit this. This is where we have to go at. Anger is at the heart level. Surrender your right to stay angry. And I don't know what your particular perspectives are or thoughts are, but I think there's pushback to this kind of thought. And I've pushed back against it too. But doesn't God get angry? How is that fair? If God gets angry, right? I mean, doesn't Jesus, there's that scene in the New Testament where Jesus throws over the tables in the temple. And wasn't Jesus always kind of addressing or standing up for the poor and the marginalized and kind of confronting the religious elites of the day? Yeah, Jesus gets angry. God gets angry. I should be able to get angry. I'll just say this. I think his perfect character is able to sustain things that your and mine can't. His character is perfect. He gets to do things and is capable of handling things that you and I aren't capable of handling. Case in point, I'm told not to judge. It says that God will judge the living and the dead. I'm told not to go after revenge. And God clearly says, vengeance is mine. I'm just not convinced that I have the strength of character to be angry, to have even a righteous anger. And whenever God, and this is, I think, neat, whenever God acts on anything, he always acts with the full measure of his love. So he can be all these things, all these character traits of God, and yet every single time he acts, it's with the full measure of love. But Justin, on the other hand, I tend to blur the lines. Maybe I'm full of love. Maybe there's not much love there. I blur the lines. Whenever God acts, it's with the full measure of both. It's because he's perfect. His character is better than mine. The other thing is, I can say I get to be righteously angry, but I didn't die for the universe. I think only the one able to take away the sins of the entire world has the moral authority to wield righteous anger. And I just can't seem to have that kind of moral authority. I just can't seem to disentangle myself from the lack of humility and pride that's in my anger. I get angry, but it's got pride in it, and it's not always humble. And I tend to go at things with this almost feeling of moral superiority, and I don't know about you, but where my thoughts, my feelings, my opinions, my perspectives are just better. And the thing is, I can say I get to get angry. I have a right to get angry, and Jesus is calling us to surrender our rights, and so is James. And Jesus himself takes any kind of moral superiority off the table in our anger. He says this in one of his most famous sermons, the Sermon on the Mount. He says this in Matthew 5:21. You have heard that our ancestors were told you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say, if you're even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. Oh. So how can I or why would I justify staying angry when Jesus is murder's bad, right? I agree, Jesus. Anger is at the same level. What? It's a heart thing. You gotta surrender your right to stay angry. I don't know, maybe you're someone that's like, but we need righteous anger, don't we? If we're in a fight injustice, you have to fight injustice by getting angry, right? To which, let me encourage you to look at it a different way. If you are going to get angry every single time one of God's commands is broken, then you will be miserable your whole life. Right? Constant, perpetual, always. That can't be healthy. The other thing is, in the New Testament, it talks about people that have made a decision to follow Jesus, and the Spirit of the living God lives within them, and it talks about what the transformation of followers of Jesus look like that way. And it says that the Spirit produces certain characteristics, behaviors, called fruit of the Spirit. You look at the list of that, and I looked at the list for righteous anger, and it's not there. It's not one of the fruits the Spirit promises to build into my life. It's not one of the transformations. Righteous anger isn't one of them. But love is. It's a very different response, but love is. And this is just my conviction and my belief. I believe the love of God will do more to change and transform ourselves and other people than our anger, however righteous it may feel, will ever do. And my heart with this, I just believe this because when I look at the story, when I look at God's whole story, I see, and I believe this because almost 2,000 years ago, it did. Anger didn't, but love did. The love of God made a way for us to be free from our anger. If you put yourself in Jesus' perspective for just a moment, you've got, in thinking about it like this, the same hands that were holding at that time, holding the whole world together, and now still are holding the whole world together. They were nailed to a brutal piece of wood in a form of torture so horrendous that it's no longer in existence. And he did that because of my sin, because of my mistakes, so that my past would be paid for, and not just mine, but that of the whole world. If you want to talk about someone who had every right to be angry over injustice, it was Jesus. That would have been appropriate. It would have been appropriate for him to list my mistakes, to list the errors and grievances from the cross, but what he said instead was very different. In those last moments, he said, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He had the right to be angry, and yet he surrendered that right. And for those that were there that day, as well as those of us thousands of years later, it blows our minds. It wasn't anger that drew us in. It was the mercy of God that draws us in. Love will produce the change that anger never can. If you think that by being angry, it will change anything for anyone, you got to surrender that right. Anger is an emotion. It is a feeling. Love, on the other hand, is an action. It is a constant. Anger will ebb and flow, but love is a constant. It can be a constant. So I'm just inviting you to surrender your right to stay angry. Slow down, seek understanding, surrender your right to stay angry. And it's because of the love of God. It's because of what Jesus did. And I don't mean this like copy the behavior. What did Jesus do? Let's just copy that behavior. I'm not saying there's any not value in that, but it's better than that, what we have. I believe that the love of God for us creates a new perspective in us. When you become aware of who God is and where your perspective is in relation to that, or how you're positioned, when you become aware of the gap and what Jesus has done, it creates in your heart a great sense of gratitude. And where that gratitude is, anger doesn't stick around. And Jesus is the one who said, those that are forgiven much, love much. But those forgiven little, love little. So really, what do you think God feels about it? Do you think God has forgiven you? If so, then forgive others. So how do I respond when I recognize anger in my heart? And that's where I just want to invite this response. Slow down and surrender your right to be angry, to stay angry. And what if we did this at work? Like, what would our work lives look like if we were constantly seeking understanding, if we were looking through the other person's perspective, if we were known as a patient people, a level-headed people, if we were known as the peacemakers in the cubicles? It'd be a different game. It'd be a game changer almost. And then if we'd slow down long enough, then I think the Holy Spirit would prompt us to do some kindness unto some people. And if we did that, it's just going to continue to change. It's hard to do something nice for someone and hate them. I mean, maybe initially, but after a while, right? Kindness changes the direction of our heart. Would we be that kind of people in the office? Think about your kids. When we slow down and seek understanding, and this is the thing, I can unload on my kids or I can seek understanding. And if I seek understanding when they're little, as well as they grow up, when things really matter, when I need to know the most, they will trust me enough to come to me. Slow down, seek understanding, surrender your right to be and to stay angry. Think of family, think of your spouse. Man, when you will slow down, seek perspective, and in conversation, and this is something that I've noticed the older I've gotten with my wife, Eileen, she'll share something with me, and if I assume a motive, I put that motive onto her, and the argument spins out of control. But if I will slow down, then I'll hear, don't you want to hear the sigh from your spouse? It's like, yes, that's how I feel. Okay. Like, that's what I want. Then the conversation can really get going. Things can really heal, and my anger gets in the way. I think if we'll be a people who will slow down and seek understanding and surrender our right to be angry, we'll be a people that will unleash the transforming love of God in our community and in our city. And it'll change everything. So let me go ahead and pray for us. Father, thank you for what you have done for us. Speak to each of our hearts, whatever is there. Whatever may be against someone, and maybe we're even kind of sensing and feeling, and you're speaking to us right now that there's just some frustration, some irritation, some anger that we haven't dealt with. We don't even know why. Speak to us in this time. Help us to be just introspective, reflective, to think that why that might be there. Root that out of our hearts. Help us to get rid of it. And Father, if there is anyone that we are angry with, and that is illuminated in this time of communion that we're moving into, and we just need to make that right, empower us to just go and do that, to make it right, and to see that as every bit as much of an opportunity to worship you as anything else. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for not giving me and giving all of us what we deserve. Thank you for loving us. Help us to redirect that love and allow that to overflow to the people we interact with. We pray all this and ask all of this in your wonderful name, Jesus. Amen.